Today we're talking about fire moves, which means this episode is gonna be lit, fam. First time I've ever used that phrase, probably gonna be the last. Hello internet, welcome to Game Theory, where today we're looking at Pokemon, because, let's be honest, Pokemon is an infinite well of theory fodder. Balls capable of carrying gods, a world that lets 10-year-olds wander around aimlessly without anybody getting charged for child endangerment, hilariously ineffectual crime syndicates that are capable of being completely dismantled by said 10-year-olds. Today though, we're not focusing on the bizarre lore of this world, but rather the bizarre science. Specifically the science of fire-type Pokemon. Why? Well, 3 reasons. 1, because fictional video game science is awesome. 2, because YouTube's Grant Thompson, aka the King of Random, was in town to do some science experiments, and we decided to play around with fire in ways that were very reminiscent of Pokemon fire moves, and also very reminiscent of things they tell you not to try at home. Stick around to see if we still have all our fingers intact. And 3, I just finished working on a deadlock debate against Austin. You know, Austin from The Science, where he defends Charmander as the best Gen 1 starter Pokemon, and if I don't say so myself, I utterly crush him in it. And so now I want to rub it in by doing an episode covering the Pokemon that he lost defending. You lost. Anyway, that episode will be coming out in a few weeks, so if you have an opinion on who the best Pokemon starter is, and you want your voice to be heard, well then take this opportunity to headbutt that subscribe button to get notified of when it comes out to make sure that your favorite starter wins. In the next 3 seconds, can you quick attack that subscribe button and let me know in the comments below whether you're a member of the Bulba Buddies, the Squirtle Squad, or the Charmander Champions? 1, 2, 3. Fantastic! Now that there's a large head-sized hole where your subscribe button used to be, let's begin with Charmander. One of the most beloved starters and perhaps the most iconic evolutionary sequence in the entire Pokemon series. Well, except for Charmeleon, he's like the awkward puberty portion of that evolutionary tree. And if there's one feature that made Charmander iconic, it's his flame tail. Well, in retrospect, it's the only thing that made him iconic, considering Charmander's design would literally just be like a baby dinosaur lizard without it. Regardless, question 1 of the day, what keeps that flame tail burning? It's actually an important mystery for the Pokeverse, since the tail flame is often linked to the survival of the Charmander. According to Brock in episode 11 of the anime, Charmander the stray Pokemon,
now it's waiting out there in the rain for you. And if its tail flame goes out, it'll die.
This is also supported in the games, as the Charmander Pokedex entry in Fire Red reads, Charmander, from the time it is born, a flame burns at the tip of its tail. Its life would end if the flame were to go out. So that would seem like it's giving us an important clue as to how these flame tails work. However, if we look at other Pokedex entries, this appears to just be flat out wrong. According to Silver, Gold, Platinum, Diamond, Pearl, Stadium 2, and others, these flame tails are just an indicator of Charmander's life force. If he's feeling strong, it burns brightly, and if he's sick or dying, it weakens and eventually goes out when he dies. What Brock and that first Pokedex entry did was mistake cause and effect in what's known as the questionable cause logical fallacy, or post hoc ergo prompter hoc, Latin for after this, therefore because of this. They assume that because one thing happened after another thing happened, i.e. the flame tail goes out and then immediately afterward they saw the Pokemon die, that the two were causal, when in actuality they were just correlated. It'd be like Ash in the anime changing his hat, then losing a bunch of Pokemon matches and him blaming his changed hat for all those losses, when in actuality the real reason might be, oh, I don't know, ignoring all type advantages and using Pikachu for literally every battle. He thought that there was a cause and effect relationship when in actuality, he just sucks as a trainer, period. Does things in the anime that you can't do in the game.
Charizard, use flamethrower to burn the battlefield!
Charizard is striking the field with flamethrower!
Ash used Deus Ex Machina. It was super effective, literally every episode. Anyway, this is an important distinction to make because it helps contextualize all these shots of Charmander trying to shield itself from the rain. While the water would weaken him, the rain itself isn't going to put the flame out. We see this in the episode Charizard's Burning Ambitions, where he is literally submerged underwater for several seconds without the flames getting extinguished. As such, we know that the flame on their tail is what what's known as a Class B fire, one created by a flammable liquid or gas, as those are the ones where water is less effective at putting them out. So we know that the flames that these creatures are creating are some sort of chemical or gas that's being lit. But to figure out how exactly, we need to look at what makes a fire. Fire is basically just a super fast version of a type of reaction that exists everywhere in our world, what's called a reduction-oxidation reaction, or redox reaction for short. Oxidation is the loss of electrons, and reduction is the gaining of electrons. Basically, it's just another way of saying an electron swap, like an atomically small flea market. Rust on a car is one of the classic examples of a really slow redox reaction. Adding heat, though, speeds up this process by putting energy into molecules. And if you add enough heat, eventually you can get a fire. Now, you may have heard of something called the fire triangle. Basically a way of visualizing the three necessary components for any fire: heat, oxygen, and fuel. And sure, that was all well and good and it made a lot of sense, but then the fire triangle got jealous of the food pyramid because the food pyramid got a snazzy new millennial upgrade a few years ago, and so the fire triangle decided to change too.
What? Fire triangle is evolving? Fire triangle evolved into fire tetrahedron!
No joke, the fire triangle is now known as the fire tetrahedron. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how people keep their jobs. So anyway, they added a new ingredient, creating a shape that looks like this, which honestly reminds me of the Triforce. The Fire Triforce? That's what it should be called! How much cooler would that be getting taught in Boy Scout camps? Or your brownies troop? That is what it shall be called from here on out. The Fire Triforce. Nintendo, if you're listening to me, next Zelda game include a Fire Triforce. It would be so cool and educational. Anyway, the Fire Triforce consists of heat, oxygen, fuel, and that new fourth element, a chemical chain reaction. Essentially, all four elements must be present for fire to occur, and altering their levels have different impacts on the fire itself. The more heat you put into the Triforce, the faster these molecules bind together. The more oxygen you put into the shape, the hotter it burns. The more fuel you put in, the more total energy it releases. But it's that new part of the Triforce, chemical chain reactions, where I think Pokemon are getting their fire abilities. We already covered why it's likely these fire moves are chemical-based, but for further evidence, just watch these clips from the anime.
Look! That's Team Rocket's balloon! They must be up to no good! Arcanine! Flamethrower!
Officer Jenny, you mean Growlithe? Because that's not an Arcanine, that's definitely a Growlithe. Again, loyal theorists, a good reason why you gotta take things said by the anime with a grain of salt. Anyway, I meant these clips, and you better appreciate them because I poured through countless Pokemon AMVs to find them. Don't want to listen to another J-pop song for years.
It's a candy!
What you'll notice across each of these is that when the Pokemon prepares its fire-based attacks, they'll either tilt their mouths up as if they're collecting and preparing to spit some sort of liquid, or, as you can really see in that Arcanine clip, they'll charge a small fireball in their mouths before launching it forward into a flamethrower, fire blast, or incinerate attack. The best explanation for this, and the overall best scientific explanation for the idea of animals that breathe the fire in the first place, comes from one of Earth's smallest creatures, the beetle. Specifically, the bombardier beetle. This thing is like the Walter White of the animal kingdom in that he uses the terrifying power of chemistry to fight its turf wars. Watch out, Misty! He is the one who scuttles.
When it's threatened, the bombardier beetle shoots out boiling hot liquids at its foes.
How does it do this? Well, it's got three organs that work together as its abdomen. Two of them are reservoirs for chemicals, hydroquinones and hydrogen peroxide. When it's threatened, this little bug tosses those two chemicals together into its third organ, basically a large reaction chamber where the hydroquinones and hydrogen peroxide perform a redox reaction like we mentioned in creating fire earlier, and boom! They heat up to boiling temperatures and explode, shooting out a jet of deadly liquid at its enemies. I mean, we've already discussed the chemistry of redox reactions, so in higher amounts, this could absolutely result in viable fire breath. Except this comes out of their butts, making it the insect equivalent of going to the bathroom post-Chipotle. Ugh. Anyway, the point is what the beetle does is exactly what it appears fire Pokemon are doing. They store in their bodies two separate chemicals that, when mixed, combust into a fire. Hence why we see them tilting their heads up to keep the liquid chemicals in there and reacting. Then, when the little fireball is prepared, they launch a chemical stream forward, the fuel for the fire, allowing that starter flame to follow its fuel down until it reaches its foe. In a lot of ways, it's the same way flamethrowers work. And so you ask, why is there a flame flame on Charmander's tail? Well, that's where the two chemicals are being stored, in their butts, just like the bombardier beetle. And the flame has been selected by evolution, with bigger flames scaring off your enemies by showing that you have more powerful fire abilities. And if all else fails, you can use the flaming tail to attack. It gives you a fuel source the way it stays lit underwater, explains other fire-type moves, and also has an evolutionary advantage attached to it. So, I don't know, it may not be perfect, but I think it's a pretty darn good explanation for the chemistry behind all of this. So now that we understand the mechanics of fire and how flamethrower-type moves work, I want to look at one other move from the Pokemon series, Fire Spin. You use the move, and if it connects, you lock your opponent down for 2 to 5 turns while this thing burns them alive. Because nothing says game for kids quite like torching your enemies to ash like they're supporting characters on Game of Thrones. Ash Ketchum, burning people to ash. Coincidence? I think so. Unfortunately, the animations in the games aren't entirely clear about how this move works, and its portrayal in the manga and TV show are super inconsistent. But given that the game shows fire moving from left to right, the fact that most of the depictions show fire encircling its victims, and that spin is in the name of the move, I think we can assume that what we're dealing with here is something truly terrifying: fire tornadoes. Or I guess more appropriately, fire whirls, because that's the real name of the real natural phenomenon that these Pokemon are creating. But nobody online actually calls them that because of clickbait. Sweet, sweet clickbait. Anyway, like I said, fire tornadoes or fire whirls are real things that are really deadly. Strangely enough, they're not very well documented, which, you know, is kind of surprising given that they're super cool, or more accurately, enormously hot, getting up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 1090 Celsius in temperature, which is more than hot enough to melt most metals. What we do know is that they actually share less in common with tornadoes than they do with dust devils out in the desert. While a tornado is created by hot air getting wedged under a cold front so that the lighter hot air tries to push through the cold air above, fire whirls are created by the fierce wind conditions that are caused by massive wildfires. You see, wildfires heat up the air in an area so much that they create turbulent gusts of wind, which can combine with the hot air moving upward, creating spinning pillars of fire. And that spin is what makes fire whirls so dangerous. It means that they're spinning in or sucking in more oxygen than a standard non-spinning fire. And as we know, oxygen is one of the key ingredients in our Triforce. The gusts that these things create also mean in the wild that they move, which means that a fire that would ordinarily burn out due to lack of fuel will actually whirl on to new areas, finding and burning up more fuel as it goes, but never quite running out. Now, how does all this relate to the game? Interestingly, if you compare Fire Spin to the other most common Gen 1 moves, it's actually one of the weakest moves in the moveset, sometimes even getting beaten out by Ember, the weakest fire move you can have that they give you at the beginning of the game. But if it lands, it can last for up to 5 turns, and this coincides with the science. Fire Spin is an attack focused on duration, trapping your opponent for multiple turns, and as we just learned, fire whirls in real life are able to sustain themselves by sucking in more oxygen and fuel than your typical fire. Also, it makes sense that it's going to be weaker. Other moves like Flamethrower and even Ember are launching fire directly at the opponent. Fire Spin, though, is all about using that heat in the area around the opponent to create the temperatures necessary to prompt eddies of wind to spark that swirling fire tornado. Heat is being lost in the attempt to create these things in the first place, and that points to the last factoid about this move: its inconsistency. These things IRL are rare, popping up only occasionally. The conditions have to be just right to make them happen. That's probably why, in the game, it has one of the lowest accuracy percentages of any fire move. And even then, the number of turns it actually lands for varies greatly. But hey, while they might not pop up all that often in real life, they're actually surprisingly easy to create in your own backyard, like I did with the King of Random specifically for this episode. You know, sometimes you get tired of game theories being just theories. Sometimes you gotta make a game theory a game reality. And today I did just that. But hey, that's just an experiment. An experiment that almost burned down my backyard. Thanks for watching. And if you think Grant and I are done, we ain't done by a long shot. We also tested out how Mario could throw fireballs underwater. So we stuffed a bunch of tennis balls full of thermite and lit them off at a public beach. As you do. So click that button you see on screen right now to see those shenanigans at work. Also, make sure that you do me the favor of subscribing to the King of Random to thank him for coming on the show, and also us, because there's that debate on the best Pokemon Pokemon starter coming up in a week or two. And lastly, here are some more shenanigans of me sucking down sulfur hexafluoride and making my voice really deep.
Super geek and super intense. Come over to join the dark side.
Now, if you'll excuse me, it looks like my, favorite franchise might be coming to an end, which means it is time to theorize. See you next week.